Everybody would like to welcome up Mr. Billy Lawson.
Can we get a let's go Billy? Are we allowed to say that? We're allowed to say let's go Billy. Y'all know me.
Brandon.
I guess we'll just take that thing off stand, make it easier, because I don't know how to adjust that thing right there. I'm a fishing guy, folks, not a sound engineer, that's for sure. First thing I want to do is thank Monty Reagan. Thank you, and thank Fun and Son for giving me this opportunity, man. This is I know there's not a whole bunch of us here. It's the early part of Friday before everybody's got off work, but I don't know how many of y'all have been to these deals before. How many of y'all been to the Fun and Sun shows before? So you're well aware of some of the knowledge that's been passed on the stage, right? Like, I feel like I'm way above my pay grade right now, sitting on this stage where I've sat there and watched so many guys like Justin Lucas right there, and Nick LeBron, and Todd Faircloth around the corner. I'm going to miss half of them that are in here. But these are guys that are the best in the game, and they sit up here and share that knowledge. So for me to get the opportunity to sit up here and talk fishing with you guys, which, I love fishing. It's my whole life. And anything that I can do to help, I want to. But for me to actually be able to sit on the stage is a really big deal for me personally. So I really appreciate Fun and Son and Monty Reagan for this opportunity. Appreciate you guys being here to listen. Please ask questions. We do seminars like these at Lake Fork every 2 weeks. So I'm familiar with this format. And my favorite part is just answering y'all's questions. So if you have any questions about anything at any time, just shout it out. I don't care how you want to do it, raise your hand, whatever you want to do, just open forum, man. Let's sit up here and talk fishing and just be happy to be in the greatest nation on the planet, right? Let's do that. So, all right. It's winter time and water is low on Lake Fork, but I wanted to talk about this because it's not just Lake Fork that's low. Now, Lake Fork might be the most drastically low because they manually dropped it to do some work on the dam recently all the way down to 6 foot low. But if you look around, there's several lakes that are below full pool right now. All over DFW, all over the state of Texas, really. So we're all dealing with somewhat of low water. So I want to talk to you guys about techniques that can work right now in the wintertime, and areas that you can find fish right now in the wintertime, and what happens to those fish when that water does draw down like that. What does it do to those fish's behavior? Because there's going to be something that's going to be very contradictory coming up here pretty soon. If the water stays low and the fish start spawning, you've got water that's down, which tends to pull fish out, but yet you've got the urge to spawn, which pushes fish in and shallow. Well, which way do they go? So I don't know. I'm confused. Are they pulling out or are they going in? So it can be a little bit to wrap your head around. So I'll try to help you with that. But we'll start with right now. We've had a great combination of things here lately, guys, with low water conditions, and then the water getting colder. It's actually made the fishing jam up. Like, it's made it a lot better. It's made the bite much more predictable. It's made the fish group up where when you do find them, you find a lot more of them. So that water getting colder over the last few weeks with these cooler temperatures we have, which it's warm right now, but it's going to be like Alaska out there tomorrow, right? So they said the high starts with a 3. I said, I'm out. See y'all later. I live in Texas for a reason. I don't want none of that. But that added to those fish pulling out away from the bank. Okay, a few weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago on Lake Fork, you could run around banks of creeks, shallow flats, and you can just throw a little shallow diving crankbait, bouncing it off wood, and you could get a lot of bites doing that, and get some big bites doing that. You'd be hard pressed to do it now because of the way the water, the temperatures have cold trended, which is going to push those fish off the bank into the first drop off. And then also with the lake level dropping, that's going to pull the fish off the bank to the first depth change, the first drop off. What is our first depth change away from the bank? Who knows? Who knows what the first depth change away from most banks is? Anybody? Now y'all gonna have to participate.
Creek channel.
Creek channel. That's right. And there's different kinds of creek channels. There's main creek channels, and there's secondary channels, and there's kind of what we call drains in Texas. But all these things are essentially just channels. They're low water areas where the water drained before the lake was a lake. these are going to be, especially throughout the winter months, but at all times with low water conditions, these drains and channels and secondary channels and all like that, guys, that's going to be the most important piece of structure in the lake. Those fish already use those even under normal conditions to travel the lake, but with the drawdown of the lake, or as the lakes drop and then the water temps drop, it pulls them from the bank. That's where they're going. It's not only just their highway anymore, it's kind of where they live, it's where they eat, it's where they sleep, it's where they do everything, is in those drains and channels, and they're there all the time. And the combination of the water cooling and the water dropping has put just about every fish in, any fish that's in a creek arm on Lake Fork is in the channel right now. Now, that's how you locate it. That's where you, we just make it real easy. Go to the creek channel, boys, that's where they're at right now, right? So, how do you catch them? That's the next question. It's January. How do you catch a bass, right? It can be tough at times, especially Florida stream bass like Lake Fork has. Lake Fork has a bunch of timber. I think everybody knows that. A lot of lakes around here, Ray Roberts, you know, Louisville, a lot of these lakes got timber in them in the creek arms and such. So these creek channels are lined with timber. One thing that happens is these creek channels, when they were creeks before it was a lake, the biggest trees tend to grow along the edge of the old creek channel, especially live oak trees. Live oak trees hold their leaves longer in the year. It's the biggest trunk tree we have in East Texas where I'm from, and it needs more water because it holds leaves longer throughout the year. Therefore, it grows next to a water source. The biggest live oak trees are going to grow right next to the water source, which a lot of times is the creek channel. What that tells me is my biggest stumps, which are going to have the biggest root systems. Because when I'm fishing standing timber in the wintertime on the creek channel, I'm not really thinking about fishing that piece of timber. I'm thinking about fishing that brush pile that is known as a root system at the base of that tree. That's really where the juice is down there at the bottom of that tree. And essentially what you have on these drop-offs into these channels is you have tree, 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 tree. And what you've got is root system, root system, root system. So if you were graphing with your electronics on the main lake out on any of these lakes around here, and you found a sharp drop-off, almost a bluff wall, which is what these outside bends of these creek channels look like, and you found brush piles hanging over the edge of that bluff wall, in your head you'd be like, dude, I found the Jigs, right? Like if you saw that on your graph, you'd be like, oh my goodness, boys, I found the spot. Like, where's Bill Wilcox? The honey hole. He found it, and you find that. A miniature version of that is every creek channel bend that has a good drop-off and stumps on it. That's what it is. It's brush piles lined up overhanging the edge of a ledge. That's what these creek channel bends are. It's the ultimate place for fish to feel comfortable. Big dominant fish getting big dominant cover. That's where they go. The best way to catch these fish, in my opinion, in the wintertime is going to be a jig. A jig, everybody knows a jig's drawing power to big fish. We've all heard about all. I mean, if you go look at I think back in the day on the share looker list, they would put what baits you caught it on, you know? And you go look at that list and see how many of them say black and blue jig in the wintertime, black and blue jig. Like, it's just an unbelievable big fish bait. A lot of reasons it is. We're going to get into some of that. But that jig allows you to get in and out of those root systems without getting hung up. And the way that I fish a jig through those root systems, I think, causes fish to bite. They won't bite hardly anything else. Like, it's a fish that I can't hardly access, and I don't know that I can even bite anything else. Let me explain to you what I do. So I actually throw the jig. I'll sit on one side of the channel, usually on the inside of the bend, and throw out past the timber, and I'll drag the jig back to me. And I don't want to shake it. I know I see a lot of guys, them guys over there when they're on TV, usually they're fishing in spring and summer when they're shaking that jig around, hopping the Texas rig around. I don't want to do none of that right now. I want to drag it. I just want to lift my rod and drag it. What's going to happen is that jig's going to approach that root system, and it's going to start hitting roots, and it's going to kind of catch. Like, it's going to get bound up on some of those roots. Y'all know that feeling I'm talking about when you're dragging a jig and it stops, and then you just pull a little bit harder, it kind of pops free. Okay, so when that happens, I just drag. When it pops free, I drop my rod tip, and what happens is that jig drags, catches on those roots, pops free, drop my rod tip, it zooms down into that root system. So when that fish is sitting down there in those overhanging roots, that jig almost surprises them and scares them into bite. if you can picture that in your mind. I'm just old angry bass sitting down here in the root system, right? Then all of a sudden here comes this half-ounce black and blue jigs right by my face. He's gonna snap at him. It's akin to fishing a grass flat in the wintertime and taking a trap and it stops in that grass and snap it. Pops out, they bite it, or chatterbait, right? That grass bite, when it stops and it snaps. Same thing, we're doing that with a jig in a root system, guys. Does that make sense to y'all? So you get that jig kind of hung up, and then when it pops free and falls real quick, that's your reaction, like just like when you pop it out of grass. And it's the simplest thing to do, because you just do this, and then when you feel it pop free, you drop your rod tip. And when they hit it like that, a lot of times they're going to slack your line. This ain't like your mushy winter jig bite you've heard about. They're going to pop it, like they'll rattle the guys in your rods. It's been super effective on Lake Fork for me for a lot of years. It works really well. To be able to do that, you have to be able to do it effectively without wasting your time being hung up, and to be able to control some of those big fish in those root systems, you've got to have the right jig, you've got to have the right line, you've got to have the right rod. Those three things are really important. On a rod, you're going to need a pretty heavy action rod, because you hook an 8 or 9 pounder down in the root system, you want to set the hook and get him coming up. You want to be able to kind of manhandle him to get him out of those roots, okay? I'll throw a 7.7 heavy action rod. It's a Century Series from 6 Inch Fishing. And it's just a super, super light and sensitive rod. I will tell you this, on a jig rod, if you can, you want to spend a little more money. You want to have a high dollar blank and more expensive rod on a technique that's going to be, it's a sensitivity driven bite, right? Like if I'm throwing a frog, I don't need my rod to be very sensitive. Like I can see it blow up on it, right? Or if I'm throwing a crankbait and I'm just going to kind of lean into him when he bites it, I don't need my rod to be as sensitive. If I'm dragging a jig or dragging anything slowly, I want to have a very high quality, sensitive rod, which a lot of times is going to mean you need to spend a little more money and buy a higher quality rod. So I do recommend that. Line, I always use 20-pound fluorocarbon. I don't like to use braid. Old timber, braid will actually cut into it. When you drag that jig, as that line rubs on that timber, it will actually cut a groove in it, a little groove, and it'll make your jig hang up for it, which obviously is a bad deal. I'm not sure that fish can hear it, but I do know that braid makes noise anytime it touches something. Y'all ever heard that braid going through your rod guides? Whatever that little squeaky noise, y'all know what I'm talking about. I don't know that it makes that noise down there. I don't know that fish can hear that noise, but I know when braid touches something, it makes noise. So I don't want to take a chance with that either if I don't have to. And fluorocarbon, the reality is modern fluorocarbon has very little stretch. And it's very sensitive, and it does the job for me. So I'll throw 20-pound fluorocarbon. This is probably the most important part right here, the jig. The head design on your jig is going to determine how much money you leave down in those root systems and how much percentage of your day you get to keep fishing and not be hung up. It's also going to determine what percentage of your fish get to the boat in a big, big way. A huge part of jig fishing is how well that jig hooks the fish when it tries to come out of its mouth. Okay, so y'all gonna stay with me on this now. You gotta pay close attention to this one. On a jig head design, in my opinion, the stand-up jig heads that are taller than they are wide. So they're this wide, but they're this tall. That's not good for hooking fish. It's phenomenal for being weedless. That little narrow head slides through cracks and crevices like nobody's business. So you get in and out of the roots, great. Problem is, in my opinion, when you have those tall and not wide jig heads, when you set the hook on a fish and his mouth is closed, that jig head is shaped like this. A fish's mouth is shaped like this. So that jig rolls on you a lot of times when you set the hook. If you hook a fish right there, you're not always going to hook him very good when you get that corner meat. You're going to lose some of those fish. That's that soft meat. We want to get him somewhere in the top portion of his head. Now, if you take an Arky style jig, an old Arky style jig, you might be familiar with the Arky style jigs? Yep. No, okay. Man, that is a fish hooking dude. I mean, it's flat and wide and only about yay tall. Like it's a big, wide jig and not tall at all. Well, that jig's going to come out straight up and straight down that fish's mouth. It's going to hook him in the top most of the time. It's also going to hang every piece of that root system most of the time. It's going to hang up more than your other jigs. So those are kind of the two extremes of jig head designs. And so what I like to do is get somewhere in between. and I like to try to find the right blend of a jig head design to where I'm going to have a great hookup ratio but remain weedless. And yes, I'll work with 6-inch fishing, and I'm not here to sell you 6-inch fishing tackle today. I'm here to help you catch more fish. But the reality is the hybrid jig that they make is the best head design that I've found. For the combination of being weedless and hookup and ratio of landing, that's the best jig I found. If you look at that head design, it's wider than it is tall, so it's going to tend to come out with the hook pointing up. But it's got all these angles to it where the jig hook, it will turn and roll, and it helps it slide through different crevices in the brush balls type little areas. But when it turns, it never turns that hook more than about here to here as it slides through stuff. So that hook is always, even when it comes out, if that jig turns a little bit, you get them somewhere in the top portion of their mouth 9 times out of 10. Very, very rarely will I get a side corner meat, soft meat hookup on that hybrid jig. It's not the only one that does that. It does it the best, in my opinion, but like the Santone jig is pretty good. Santone jig does hook fish really good. It hangs up a little more than a hybrid jig does, in my experience. But Santone jig's a really good one too. Another Texas company. Of course, all these companies, these jigs, I like them in Texas. I don't know what that's about. Maybe they know how to design them because they're fishing the same stuff I am, right? But you know, and some of the Strike King jigs are pretty good too, like the Hack Attack jig and stuff like that's good too. But or the old Denny Brower jigs were good. You know, they hung up a little more, but they were hooking good. There's one that's got, I don't even know if they make it anymore, but Lake Trophy Lures, Lake Fork Tackle used to have a jig, and the head was designed by the late great Mr. Mark Pack, who might be the most underrated jig fisherman in the state of Texas in the history of bass fishing. The dude fish a jig like nobody's business. But that original head design,
The impact jig?
Well, the impact jig is his new one with that new weed guard. And the original head design was when he was with Lake Fork Trophy Lures. And it had a very similar head to the hybrid jig. It was almost the hybrid jig design upside down. But that head design was my favorite. Like, until the hybrid jig came out, that was my favorite jig head. I love that head design, the original head design by Mark Pack. In fact, when he first started making prototypes of that new weed guard system on the impact jig, I was fortunate enough to get a couple of those that were made by his hands in his garage. I knew him personally at the time. He gave them. And one of those jigs, man, I had it forever and ever. What it was, he had used his old Lake Fork tackle mold and made it with that head that I like, but put that new weed guard on there. Once I'm telling y'all, I fished that jig for 2 or 3 years. I never lost it. Like, if I lost that one, I almost went in to get it. You know, I just loved it so much. But it had no paint on the head. I had retied the skirt probably at least 10 times on that jig. I mean, I just, that's all I want to fish with every time. I love that jig. Yeah. But I love jig fishing, man. And that head design, like I said, the head design is such a big deal. For your jig fishing effectiveness and efficiency and keeping yourself sane and not being hung up, and also hooking and landing your fish, the head design like jig is as important as anything you'll ever find. So, do y'all have any questions this evening? Surely we do have some questions. No, nothing. You want to talk about anything else? We got a lot of time to fill.
Jig size.
Jig size. Great question. I didn't talk on that. Thank you, sir. Never below a ½ ounce, believe it or not. In the wintertime, that's kind of contradictory to what people would say. You know, in the wintertime, we like to downsize our baits, and I do trim my baits down and make them more compact. Definitely, 100% do. That's another thing we need to talk about. But for that bite, in those root systems on those creek channels, remember, we want it to fall fast. It's a reaction bite. It's like ripping a bait out of grass. When it snaps over that root system, it goes to fall, and it needs to fall fast. I actually throw a 3/4 ounce jig a lot. Even throw a 1 ounce jig at times in the middle of winter. A lot of people would tell you in wintertime everything in water column moves slower, so let's throw a finesse jig, a 1/4 ounce jig, yada yada yada. And yes, that has its place. But for this deal, we're trying to get a reaction bite. And I bet you could ask any of those guys on that list that come up here in the next couple of days, what catches bigger fish on average, reaction bites or finesse bites? Now they are all great finesse fishermen because they have to be, because they got to put a limit in the boat to make a living. But every one of them knows that a reaction bite, on average, is going to be a bigger bite. Well, when you're out on Lake Fork and you're a fishing guy, you're just trying to catch the biggest ones you can. Well, that's all we do. So we're trying to target big bass. We're wanting a reaction bite, so I use a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce every great once in a while. I really want to try to get a reaction. I'll use a 1 ounce. Mostly it's 1/2 to 3/4. Never below a 1/2, even in the coldest conditions. Guys, I've been on Lake Fork when the air temperature is 21 degrees and the water temperature 38, throwing a jig in a creek channel, and it's a 1/2 ounce jig and it's still good. So you don't have to downsize to get bit, even in the most extreme conditions. Great question.
The other night, your video came out, I think it was on your A-rig. You talked about the rod and reel, but you didn't say anything about the line. What kind of line do you like to use on your A-rig?
On an Alabama rig, what kind of line do I like to use? Okay. Man, if I'm throwing jig heads on my rig, I actually a lot of times will use like a 20 or 25 pound monofilament rod. Yeah, just to give me, because I've got such a big rod. On an Alabama rig, you need to use a big rod to save your joints, man. It's taxing. It wears you out throwing that Alabama rig all day. And so I will use a really big, like a 7/8 super heavy, like stout rod, or even a longer 8-foot heavy rod. But it's still, man, that Alabama wears you out. So I've got this giant rod, right? But I've got these open jig hooks on the A-rig. So I kind of need a little bit of stretch to keep me from ripping the bait away from the fish as much in time. So I do tend to use mono to add that stretch factor in there. And that helps me let the fish load up on the bait a little better. I will throw even the jig head ones on fluorocarbon, 20-pound fluorocarbon, but I really prefer to throw it on monofilament. One thing I don't do, and I know other guys do to try to get their bait back on, I don't throw it on braid, because with a heavy action rod and heavy braid, there is no stretch in the equation whatsoever. And I just don't feel like those fish are going to get the bait as good, and I might miss some. Because you get a lot of bites on A-rig, they just kind of swipe at it or bump at it. They don't really fully just choke the bait, so you kind of need something that lets you load them up a little bit. But you also got to have a big rod to throw it all day without killing yourself. So monofilament helps me there. I do rig, especially fishing it around timber, low water conditions, when you can see most of the lanes in the timber. Great thing to do. We just talked about this on our video Wednesday. Great thing to do. Phenomenal way to fish is rig small weedless swim bait hooks, 1/16 ounce 3-aught weedless swim bait hooks on little 3.5 inch swim baits on an Alabama rig. When I fish it like that, I definitely do not want to throw on. I'll throw fluorocarbon. You could throw braid on that. I don't personally. I'm going to throw fluorocarbon, probably 20 pound, maybe 25 pound. But usually 20 pounds is pretty strong. Like $6 red label 20 pound line will like pull your boat across the lake. Like it's strong, really strong line. So I don't have too many problems with break-offs with them. Especially now that we have live sonar, and you can kind of watch your A-rig come back to the boat, and kind of when it gets close to the tree, you can steer it over it or whatever you need to do. But that's the line I'm using. So fluorocarbon only when I'm weedless. Mono, can use fluorocarbon, but really like to use mono when jig hits. Okay. We also mentioned about going back to the jig for a second. In the wintertime, guys, do make the profile small. I like to make the profile small. So I will actually take that jig out of the box and I will trim the skirt right where the bottom of the bend of the hook is on the jig. I'll trim the skirt right there. Trim it right there. And then I trim my trailer. And the trailer that I use a lot is the 6-inch stroker crawl. It's like a twin tail, it's like a kind of a modern take of a twin tail grub, basically. Everybody remember the Yamamoto twin tail grubs? Great jig trailer. Great. It's like that. It's a little bit bulkier, a little bit denser, but it's the same type of claws or tails, or whatever you want to call it. But the key is I'll put that skirt right at where the bottom of the hook bend is, and then I want to make sure that the appendages on the bait, the little flappers, they start where the skirt is. So right at the bend of the hook, that's where, when my hook comes out of the bait, is that making sense what I'm saying? I want those appendages to be right at the bottom bend of that hook. That way they start right where the skirt ends. It makes the whole thing look like one nice, tight, compact bait. So I have to trim some of the head off of those crawl baits that I'm using as trailers. What other questions do we have? What y'all know about trimming weed guards on jigs? Know anything about that?
Watch your videos.
Yeah. Trimming a weed guard. So if you trim a weed guard, does that make a jig more weedless or less weedless when you cut the weed guard down? What'd you say about it?
It makes it stiffer.
Makes it stiffer. So I think there's probably a general idea out there that if you cut some of your weed guard off, well, that's less protection for your hook. Couldn't be more wrong. It actually makes the weed guard protection your hook better. So the shorter you cut the weed guard, the stiffer it gets. Now, you gotta have enough weed guard to cover the point of your hook for sure. And I like to cut mine to where it's about even with the barb when I push it down. Is where the length I like to go. But the shorter that weed guard is, the stiffer it's going to be, the more it's going to protect your hook, the more weedless your jig will actually be. So trim your weed guards down at least to where your barb is. Somebody else, I think, did you have a question in the back corner a minute ago? No? All right.
Are you still running Lawrence Active Target for your forward?
Live sonar?
Yeah.
Yeah, live imaging, yeah. Yeah, I am running Lawrence Active Target, yes.
You gonna do that on your new boat?
Yes, sir. I'm gonna stay with it. I think, if I'm just being dead honest with you, I don't know, you know, even some of these tournament professionals that are here, some of those guys don't even have electronics deals anymore because they're kind of using a little of everything. Like I'm using Humminbird 360 and I'm using Lowrance Active Target. And on my next boat, I'm gonna have 2 different Humminbirds and 3 different Lowrances. So I'm finally gonna be that guy that I've been making fun of all these years that has 5 graphs. I hate all you guys that have 5 graphs. I always have. Now I'm one of you, so I hate myself, I guess. But yeah, I've been really happy with the Lowrance Active Target, and I've been in plenty of boats with Garmin. If I'm being real honest with you, if you've got them powered correctly and you've got the settings good, you are splitting hairs trying to find a difference between a live scope and an active target. They are basically the same tool. They even pretty much function the same way. I mean, there's almost no difference whatsoever. And you can dial the images in really good if you get it, especially if you get powered correctly. Like, if I get a decent sized fish close to being under my boat, on that active target, I can see his top fin, I can see his tail kick. Like, I can see everything, every inch of that fish when he gets right under my boat with it set up correctly. Power is so important only if you're getting into the live sonar. The way that you power that thing and just making sure it has enough power. Making sure that it doesn't throughout the day start losing power, you will lose image quality big time. And it'll also affect, if you've got it wired in to the same power source as your other graphs, it's going to affect the image quality on those as well. It's going to make your console down inside imaging and sonar look not as clear. You're not going to be able to see things this way. So having your electronics powered correctly with all this new stuff and these boxes that come with the live sonars and all that is so important. So if you're like me and you don't know what the heck you're doing when it comes to anything electrical, like in my house, in my truck, in my boat, like I don't do electricity, dog. Like I just don't do electricity. Like if it's even thinking about lightning outside, I don't even fish because I don't do electricity. But I just make sure I take it to somebody that's knowledgeable and tell them this is what I do, this is how I fish, I need enough power to all that, y'all make it right. I mean, that's what we do. These people right here at Fun said, I'm sure we could dang sure take care of you on that. And I've got a dealer down in Tyler that I use called Monica Model that does a great job for me. But you gotta find a guy that you trust to power yourself. It's important these days.
You think it's made a difference in the way you fish in the last year?
It moments. The question was, in case anybody knew, has live sonar made a difference in how I fished over the last year? At times, yes. No doubt, at times, yes. I think, to me, if you're using it correctly, when I'm using it to its fullest potential and getting the most out of it, it's not when it changes the way that I fish, but when it makes me more efficient at the way that I fish. Hey, Humminbird 360's never been as big a deal to me as live sonar is. I mean, I can't tell you guys how much stuff on a lake that I fished hundreds of days a year for years now, how much new stuff I found. New laydowns, new creek channel bend that wasn't where it said it was on the map, it's actually over here. New brush piles. God, the new brush piles I found on Humminbird 360. And then I'm still going to fish the way I fish. I don't do a whole lot of, let's look at them on the screen and watch them eat my bait. Look at my bait on the screen, watch the bass eat my bait. Like, I don't do that very much. This time of year, yes. They'll slow down enough this time. Throughout the year, I'm more like scanning around going, okay, he's by that tree. And I just kind of fish that tree the way I know how to fish it. Whether I'm jerking a jerk bait or whether I'm dragging a jig or whether I'm pitching to it, banging a crankbait off of it, whatever happens. I use it to be more efficient in the way that I fish, and for me, that's how it works the best. I have not honed in the Patrick Walters, Josh Jones. I mean, half the guys in the world now, I guess I'm the last one to do it. I'm always the last one to adopt new technology. That's how I am, old school, man. But I'm not good at that, right? Does that make sense? You know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm not good at looking at them on the screen, watching my bait on the screen, and catching them. I can do it when they'll sit still enough, and anybody can. But I'm not the best at that. It works better for me if I fish how I know how to fish. So I guess no. It really hasn't changed the way I fish, but it has made me a better fisherman. Does that make sense? Right? What else?
A-rig, what's your line connection? A-rig, what's your line connection? A-rig.
Line connection?
Swivel at some point?
Oh, no. On A-rig, I just tie a knot. I tie a knot. It's a knot. I'm going to tell you the name of this knot, and all you already go, what? Like, no, I don't know I've never met anyone else that ties this knot. It's called a Homer's Circle Knot. You might have heard of that? Yeah? You're the first person I met that knew what I was talking. I'm going to tell you what it was. Back in the day, a long time ago, it's kind of when fluorocarbon was somewhat newish, I think. There was some fishing show, and I can't remember what the fishing show was. Definitely before YouTube days, right? But there was some fishing show on, and they had a segment called Berkeley Knot Wars at the end of it. And at the end of that season, the knot that was the strongest for monofilament and fluorocarbon what was the second strongest was this knot called the Homer Circle Knot. And the knot that was the most strongest, I couldn't learn how to tie, so I never did that one. It was too complicated. I didn't want to take that much time to tie it. The Homer Circle Knot is basically a fisherman's knot with an overhand knot around the main line and the final tag end. So you just put your line through the eye, make an overhand knot around your main line, grab up 3, down 3, go back through that overhand knot, and cinch it all down. It is super strong on fluorocarbon and mono, and it does not, you don't have to worry about like Palmer knot with fluorocarbon, tie it wrong and cut itself. None of that's going to happen with this. And for an A-rig, what I'll do is when I go through the eye, I'll just wrap it through there twice. So now I've got 2 wraps of line on the line tie. So that's my connection. It's just that knot, kind of double improve with that extra wrap, and that's what we do.
Keep from spinning and wrapping your line on the head.
Man, I'll tell you what, the Alabama rigs I throw actually are right here. I can see them. You brought some of them. They're the Smash Deck Alabama rigs. Every once in a while they'll do that cartwheel deal where it gets wrapped. If I'm fishing an Alabama rig all day, I probably have to flip it back 3 or 4 times a day. Maybe. I'm talking about tops. For the most part, it's not an issue big enough for me to worry about. I don't know if that has to do with the weighting or the design of that A-rig or not, but that's the one I throw. And that A-rig's super durable. Y'all ever had A-rigs fall apart on you? Spend $30 on something and it just goes, and you catch a couple big ones on it or something? Well, there's an Alabama rig sitting in my garage at home right now that me and a gentleman that makes those with. We caught 200 pounds in a single day on those Alabama rigs, and that was back in October, and I've been using that Alabama rig on Lake Fork, beating the heck out of it, and the tender and everything else all winter, and I'm still using it. Like, it's built right, so I mean, there's tons of good A-rigs out there, but if you want to know you got a good one, I can vouch for that one right over there at the Smash Deck booth right next to us. Any other questions? Y'all better have some questions. If you want to sit here and look at each other, feel real dumb, but y'all have some questions.
What lake was that on?
What lake was that on? That's here we go. Here's one. What is this? Heath, is this a giveaway? What is this?
No, that's mine.
Oh, that's Greg's. It's definitely a giveaway. Yeah, there it is. The Smash Rig by Smash Take Baits. Hey guys, don't just catch them. Smash them. SmashTakeBaits.com. That's it. Good stuff. Thank you, Greg. Oh, so sorry. I'm in trouble with everybody now. I'm trying to give away my buddy's A-rig, and I'm making my whole lady mad. I'm having fun eating, ain't I, boys? Y'all might want to stick around. This might get interesting. All right, somebody think of something. Let's talk about some fish stuff. Tennyson, what do you want to talk about? You know how to catch a bass, son?
Well, yeah, I think I hooked in about probably 6 pounder or so.
He hooked a 6 pounder, friend.
I was fishing like a Dobbins Trout and Panfish series, 7.4, had some 6 pound mono on it, but
That's awesome.
Definitely your kid.
That's not my kid. That's Heath Taylor's kid. But yeah, I've been around him since he was real little, so I may have rubbed off on him somewhere. He sounded just like me. He nailed it. That was good. Alright. Y'all got anything else y'all want to talk about tonight? Y'all want to get some real pros up here?
Have you used any of the Milliken series rods?
I haven't used the Milliken series. I've just recently gotten into the Team 6 series, which is similar somewhat to the Milliken series, I think. And the ESP rods, those different handle styles. I like both of those pretty good. You know, all those rods that they're making now, like the 6-inch rods and a lot of rods, you know, if you go from company to company, you'll find some differences in quality and all that. But I will say this, on all the 6-inch line of rods, the quality is good on all of them. Some of them are a little lighter and more sensitive. Those are the more expensive ones, the Century series. And then some of them are, you know, a little less, but they're less expensive. But the quality on all of them is basically the same. It's really about finding the rod length, power, size, sensitivity, tip rating. You know, finding the rod that's the right size for what you want, for what you're trying to do with it. So I wouldn't get too tied up on which series of rod you're wanting. Granted, if you want more sensitivity, you have to spend more money. That's with any rock company on earth. You're gonna have to buy their more expensive lines if you want more sensitivity. But really, it's about finding the rod that works for you on a technique. Like for me, that jig rod, 7.7 heavy. Man, that's about right. I think every jig rod that I've thrown for the last 6 or 7 years has been somewhere between 7.5 and 7.7 heavy. I mean, that's just what I like to throw a jig on Lake Fork because of the big fish and the heavy cover. I need a big stick. But it's got to be light and sensitive, so I spent a lot of money on jig rods over the last 5 years for sure.
Billy, you talked about brush before, the brush, you know, on the weave on the corners with the brush bottles and stuff. You ever tried that with just plastic, like a Texas rig worm instead of a jig?
Yeah.
Well, do you see that big a difference in a jig compared to a Texas rig worm?
Yeah, I think they actually, you know, water's cold, but the colder the water is, I think they bite the jig better maybe in plastic water. And the reason why I think plastic gets a little stiff in cold water, the colder the water gets, the stiffer the plastic gets. So I think some of your action gets impeded on your plastic worms. I think a jig skirt with those little skinny strands of skirt material, they're going to keep moving in that cold water where that plastic may kind of lock up on you a little bit and not be as good of an action to teach the fish to bite. And also, you know, the size of the fish, I think this is pretty accepted across the board. On average, you're going to catch a bigger fish throwing a jig than you are a plastic worm. That's kind of the known thing. But especially in the wintertime, I think you actually get more bites on the jig than you do plastic. There's something too, guys, when that jig hits bottom and that skirt goes, right? And it comes back together. And the water just moves like this, right? Well, in the world of fishing, when something goes nose down to the bottom and it flares out, in a bass's world, that is an aggressive posture no matter what's doing it. If a bluegill does it, it's aggressive. If a crawfish does it, it's aggressive. When something goes head down first to the bottom and then flares up on you, that fish is trying to fight you. Bass is an apex predator. And a bass is the only apex predator on earth that has no teeth and no claws. That joker's at the top of the food chain on attitude alone, dude. Probably not the guy you want to square up on and try to fight. Which is what that jig is doing. In his world, when that jig zips to the bottom and that skirt pops out, that jig is picking a fight for that bass. And there's something in a bass's nature that he can't handle that. It's not going to be okay. He's going to have to show you who's boss. Right? It's like when you see a bedfish, like, man, they don't want to bite you. You just irritate them into biting because at some point they've got to show you who's boss. No, this is my spot. Same deal with this jig. You know? It sits down there and it flares up on them. They just, something about that quality of jig or largemouth can't handle. And in the wintertime, they're not biting feed, right? Like a lot of times, I mean, some fish are pretty small fish, big pregnant females, yeah, they got to feed, all that. But a lot of your bites in the wintertime aren't because they're feeding. They're reacting to something. That's why we throw, you know, we either throw really finesse stuff and tease them into biting, or or we throw really reactive stuff and like make them react because they're not really feeding. So you got to keep that in mind in the wintertime that whatever bait you're throwing, it needs to have some type of reaction quality to it. Things that we talked about earlier, you know, like a trap or a chattanooga grass is always really good in the wintertime. And this jig is too, but that's because when it falls real fast, you know, that's when it's the best. So even if you're throwing pedestrian rocks, it's falling off those rocks. And that's a lot of times when you get your bodies, it's sudden change of direction. The jerk bait's great, and we're talking about that. Jerk bait's all reaction. I mean, it's all direction change and sudden movement. So keep that in mind when you're fishing. When it's about reaction, they're not really feeding. Anything else?
When do you start throwing your swim baits on the floor?
Back about October, September, and we just keep throwing them until, I mean, really we kind of throw them in summertime too. Now on jig heads and stuff, you know, nowadays swim baits are on jig heads. It's hard for me as a fishing guy to throw big swim baits. Because even though we're going like we're targeting big bass, people want to catch fish when they go on a guide trip. I mean, I've even had, you know, most of the people that call you and tell you, I don't care about catching them, all I want to catch one. Well, about 30 minutes into the trip, they're going around like, man, you got a Cinco or something? They go 30 minutes out of the bite, all of a sudden they won't change up. They don't want to go for big fish no more. An hour, you know, they don't want to go for big fish no more. They want to get bite. It's fun to get bit. Anybody ever not swing the hook on a 1 pounder that big? Oh, he bites, you're going to swing the hook, you're going to reel him in. And while you're reeling him in, are you mad? No. Are you thinking about that past due mortgage bill? No. Like, there's never been anybody that's had a problem in the world while a fish is on their mind. Nobody. Right? Agreed? So, that's what happens on guide trips. It's hard for me to throw big some days because that, especially now, we used to be able to do that on guide trips, throw big swim baits a lot. Because there wasn't that many people throwing big swim baits. And you could go out there and, I mean, hand to the man, you could literally at times, you know, there was times, stretches, where you showed up to Lake and knew you were going to get 25 or 30 bites a day on a really big swim bait, which is unheard of anywhere else on earth other than Lake Fork. It's not like that anymore. You know, if back then you had 10 guys throwing big swim baits and we're getting 30 bites a day, well, now I've got 100 guys throwing big swim baits and we're getting 3 bites a day. There's just only so many of those big swim bait bites that go around. Not every fish on the lake's going to bite a bait that big. So now that everybody throws them on Lake Fork, you just can't generate enough bites day in, day out to just go out there and commit to them and throw them. It's a very rare occasion that I get to go out and have a big swim bait day where I just throw big swim baits. And it's a gamble. You might not get a it'll be big when you do. And it's awesome. I love doing it. I miss doing it as much as I used to. I used to do it a lot. It's just on Lake Fork, for guiding, it's not really a practical application anymore. There's like a couple guys that still do it with guide customers now, and they really don't do it as much as they act like they do. I mean, it's just the bites are just too divided. Too many people throwing the same thing. Because you go to Lake Fork in April. And look at the boats. It looks like people are just throwing out mailboxes in the water everywhere you turn. It's like this guy's throwing a helicopter and that guy's throwing, you know, I don't know, a doghouse up there. Just everybody's throwing things bigger than you could ever imagine all around it. You think somebody's flying everywhere on Lake Fork. It's crazy.
What else? No? Good?
Bonnie, I'm all done. I don't know where Bonnie's at, but I'm all done. He'll come up here to get somebody. I think Alton's coming up next, Alton Jones Jr. So y'all get some real pros up here. Hey, thank you guys for listening to me. Thank you one more time for Fun and Son. Appreciate it. Thank y'all.